The wind carried dust like whispers of the dead that evening, low, hissing, and mournful across the empty flats outside Dry Creek. The sun had long bled into the earth, leaving behind a pale wash of pink that clung to the sky like a dying ember. May Garner reined in her mare at the sight of a broken wagon wheel half buried near a rise, her eyes narrowing against the grit. She'd seen wrecks before, burned-out coaches, raided freighters, carts snapped clean in two by bad axles, but this one felt recent. The trail of dragged marks in the dirt told her something had fought to crawl away from it. Her heartbeat quickened. "Easy, girl," she murmured to her horse, sliding down. Her boots sank into dry silt as she crouched beside the wreck. Blood darkened the sand, old enough to crust but fresh enough to smell of iron. Then she saw him, half covered in dust and sagebrush. A man lay sprawled, face down, one sleeve torn clean off. His back rose in shallow, labored breaths. The closer she got, the more her stomach tightened. His leg, what was left of it, was crudely wrapped in a strip of saddle leather soaked through with blood. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A faint pulse fluttered against her skin. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man groaned, his cracked lips moving. "Should've stayed dead." His voice was sandpaper and sorrow. May's jaw set. "Not on my watch." She worked fast, cutting open the leather binding, wincing at the infection that had already set in. Whoever he was, he'd been through hell, and been left behind to finish the journey alone. "Hold on," she whispered, tearing strips from her own underskirt to pack the wound. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing what she'd just chosen. Because in Dry Creek, mercy came with a price. By the time she hauled him onto her horse, night had swallowed the plains. The ride back to her cabin was slow and grueling. Twice she nearly lost him, his head lolling forward, breath fading to a ghost. But each time she'd whisper something sharp and steady. "You keep breathing, soldier. Don't make me waste good fabric on a corpse." He didn't answer. But somewhere between the gulches and the ridgeline, his hand tightened weakly around her arm. When May reached her cabin, a one-room shack on the edge of Dry Creek, her arms ached and her horse trembled with exhaustion. She half dragged, half carried the stranger inside, laying him on the cot near her stove. The lamplight revealed more of the man's story than she wanted to see. He was maybe 30, face lean and hollowed from hunger. His hair was dark with dust, his uniform, if it could still be called that, hung in tatters. She recognized the faded cavalry insignia. "Lord have mercy," she muttered. A soldier. That alone could ruin her. She'd come to Dry Creek 2 years back. A nurse for hire. Someone who patched up ranch hands, pulled teeth, and delivered babies without asking too many questions. But the town was quick to judge and slow to forgive. A woman living alone was already a curiosity. A woman harboring an unknown man? That was suicide. She cleaned his wounds anyway. Through the night she worked, boiling water, stitching torn flesh, forcing spoonfuls of whiskey between his lips. His fever raged. More than once he muttered things that made her skin crawl. No survivors. All gone. My fault. At dawn, when the rooster cried, she finally sat back. The fever had broken. Barely. Exhaustion dragged her eyes shut, but before she could rest, a sharp knock rattled the cabin door. "Miss Garner?" came the voice of Tom Ellery, the town doctor. "You in there?" May froze. "Word is you brought something or someone back from the flats." Her mind raced. Outside she could hear at least 2 horses. That meant Ellery hadn't come alone. May wiped her hands on her apron and cracked the door an inch. "Just tending my rounds, Doc. Why?" Ellery's gaze flicked past her shoulder toward the cot. "Because the marshal says a deserter from Fort Mason went missing after the wagon ambush yesterday." "Dangerous man. Best we find him before someone gets hurt." May swallowed hard. Behind her, the wounded man stirred, whispering again, too faint for the doctor to hear. "Dead," he rasped. "Should have stayed dead." May met the doctor's eyes, her voice steady. "No deserter here. Doc, just dust and ghosts." Then she shut the door before he could argue. Inside, the soldier drifted between worlds. Unaware that the woman who'd just saved him had also invited the storm to her doorstep, May Garner had made her choice. And in Dry Creek, choices had consequences. And the next morning broke gray and bitter, wind cutting through the cracks of May Garner's cabin. She stirred the coals in her stove, pouring what little coffee she had left into a tin cup. Behind her, the man on her cot groaned, a rough, scraping sound that told her he'd clawed his way back from the edge. She turned, mug in hand. His eyes were open now, clouded blue, sharp but hollowed. They flicked around the room like trapped animals. "Where am I?" he rasped. "Dry Creek outskirts," May said evenly. "You were bleeding out on the flats. I brought you here." He tried to sit up and immediately winced, clutching at his bandaged stump. The pain twisted across his face like lightning. "You should have left me there." His voice cracked. More anger than gratitude. Would have been cleaner. May set the cup down hard on the table. "I don't leave breathing men to die in the dirt." He met her eyes, defiance flashing. "Then you've made a mistake." May stepped closer. "You're alive because I decided you should be." "That's no mistake." The silence that followed was thick. He looked away first, jaw tightening. His gaze fell on the crude peg she'd carved to brace his leg while he healed. "What did you do that for?" "To keep what's left of your leg from rotting off," she said. "And before you ask, no, I'm not a doctor. Just a nurse with more stubbornness than sense." He gave a faint, bitter laugh. "Then you'll fit right in around here." By afternoon, May managed to coax some broth into him. Between sips, she asked careful questions. His name, his regiment, how he'd ended up alone. He hesitated before answering. "Tobias Reed, Cavalry Scout, 4th Division." "Or I was." May's hand paused midair. "You're the one from Mason Fort?" His eyes darkened. "Used to be." Rumors had swirled for months about that place. A supply train ambushed, a dozen men missing, and one survivor branded a deserter. The name Tobias Reed had passed between saloon whispers like a curse. "What happened?" she asked softly. He stared at the fire, jaw tight. "We were ordered to ride through Apache country to recover a wagon train. But when we found it..." He stopped, breath shaking. They'd already slaughtered the settlers. Women, children. Captain wanted to torch what was left, blame the tribes, claim the bounty. I refused. So they left me there when the shooting started. His voice went flat. Next thing I knew, I woke under a wagon with half a leg gone and buzzards waiting their turn. May's throat tightened. "And no one came back for you?" "No one wanted to." He set the cup aside, staring at his hands. "That's why I said you should have left me. I'm not worth the trouble." But later that day, May stepped outside to fetch water. The wind had shifted, carrying the low murmur of voices from the trail. She spotted 2 riders heading toward town, Doc Ellery and the marshal no doubt spreading their concern. When she came back inside, Tobias was sitting upright, eyes blazing. "I heard them," he said. "They're looking for me." "Let them look," she replied. He glared. "You don't understand. If they find me here, they'll hang me before they ask questions. Then we'll make sure they don't find you." Tobias's mouth twisted. "You risk your name for a man you don't even know?" May met his gaze, calm and firm. "I know enough. I know you didn't ask to live, but you're breathing anyway. That means something." He shook his head, the shadow of a broken smile tugging at his mouth. "You sound like a preacher." "Just a nurse," she said. "And no man quits on my table." That evening a knock sounded again, softer this time. When May opened the door, she found Mrs. Callum, the storekeeper's wife, standing with folded arms and sharp eyes. "Heard you brought someone in from the flats," the woman said. "Careful, May, strays bring trouble." May kept her tone neutral. "Only brought back a fever case," Mrs. Callum sniffed. "The marshal says a deserter's hiding near town. Wouldn't want your good name tangled in that." May smiled thinly. "I'll take my chances." When she closed the door, Tobias was staring at her again, half in gratitude, half in disbelief. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why bother with me?" May's voice was steady, but her eyes softened. Because somewhere someone once bothered with me when I didn't deserve it either. He looked away, his jaw tightening but his breathing eased. For the first time since she found him, Tobias Reed didn't ask to die. And May Garner, though bone-tired and alone against a whole town's judgment, felt something stir inside her, a fragile, defiant spark of hope, the kind that could get a woman hanged. By the week's end, the whole of Dry Creek was whispering. At the general store, men leaned over barrels pretending to inspect nails, trading rumors like currency. At the saloon, someone swore they'd seen a figure limping near May Garner's cabin under moonlight. The marshal didn't need proof. He just needed gossip loud enough to call it truth. May felt it every time she rode into town for supplies, the stares that lingered too long, the women turning away as she passed. Still, she held her head high. "Let them talk," she muttered under her breath as she loaded flour and herbs into her saddlebag. They've never carried a dying man through dust with vultures circling, but when she reached home, her calm cracked. Tobias was sitting on the edge of the cot, sweat beading on his forehead, his stump still tender but his temper fully awake. "You shouldn't go to town," he said. "They'll put it together soon." "I'm not hiding like a criminal." She set her basket down. "You need clean bandages and quinine." "I don't need saving, woman." His tone bit deep, sharp enough to draw blood. May froze. "Saving? Is that what you think this is?" He turned his head away, jaw clenched. "You don't know what I've done." "No," she said quietly, "but I know what you didn't do. You didn't finish dying when you had the chance." The room went still except for the wind scraping at the shutters. He laughed then, bitter and hollow. "You're wasting your mercy on the wrong man." May crossed the small space between them, standing over him until he was forced to meet her eyes. "Mercy's not yours to decide," she said. "Now drink this before I make you." Something in her tone broke through the wall around him. He stared at the cup she held, then took it with a shaking hand. Her days turned into a pattern. May changed his bandages each morning, fed him broth thickened with barley and herbs, and kept his mind busy by talking about the world outside. The miners up north, the drought, the church roof the town still hadn't fixed. Tobias listened, saying little. But sometimes when she caught him watching her, she could tell he wanted to live, even if he couldn't admit it. Then, one afternoon, trouble came calling. The door swung open without a knock. Doc Ellery filled the frame, hat in hand, eyes hard. "Miss Garner?" "I warned you," May stiffened. "Warned me of what, doctor?" "Of sheltering a fugitive." He stepped inside, gaze sweeping the room. "The marshal's certain now. Says the deserter was spotted near your place." Behind her, Tobias had gone still as stone. May's voice stayed calm, but her pulse thundered. "You'd best check your eyes, Doc. Only one man here and he's half dead." "That's the one," Ellery said coldly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Turn him over." May folded her arms. "Not until he's healed." Ellery's mouth twisted. "You're defying the law for a man who'll hang by sundown?" "I'm defying fear," she said. "That's all." He hesitated, perhaps taken aback by her quiet conviction. "If you stand with him," he warned, "the town won't stand with you." Then he left, slamming the door behind him. The silence afterward was suffocating. Tobias stared at her, disbelief flickering through pain. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've seen what lawmen call justice out here," she said. "I won't feed another man to it." He shook his head, his face tightening with shame. "You don't owe me anything, May." She crouched beside him, cleaning his arm where he'd ripped a stitch. "I don't do it because I owe you. I do it because you still bleed, which means you still matter." That night he barely spoke. When she rose to bank the fire, she caught him watching the flames with eyes full of ghosts. Finally, he said, "You don't know what it's like. Carrying faces you can't forget." May paused, her voice softer than before. "Then stop carrying them alone." He met her gaze, anger, guilt, and gratitude all tangled together. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was alive, trembling with the weight of something neither could name. Outside, coyotes cried across the plains, thin and distant. Inside, May Garner knew she'd crossed the line between healer and outlaw in one stubborn act of mercy. And Tobias Reed, the man who'd begged to die, was starting to fight her care, not because he wanted death anymore, but because her belief in him terrified him more than any battlefield ever could. The thaw began slowly. Not in the weather. The plains still lay under the same wind-blown gray, but inside the cabin, where silence had once ruled, Tobias Reed started to move again. At first, it was only small things, reaching for his cup before May could hand it to him, dragging himself to the chair by the stove, insisting on washing his own tin plate. But then came bigger steps. One morning, May woke to the steady thud of hammering outside. She threw on her shawl and stepped into the cold. Tobias stood beside the woodpile, shirt sleeves rolled, balancing awkwardly on one leg as he tested the crude wooden limb he'd been carving from scrap pine. "Thought I told you to rest," she said, half stern, half awed. He gave a tight grin. "You did. Didn't say I had to listen." The peg leg was rough, splintered at the edges, but it held his weight. Barely. He limped, grimacing with every other step, but he stayed upright. "You'll tear your stitches," May warned. "Then you'll just have to sew me back up," he shot back. It was the first time she'd heard humor in his voice. Over the next weeks, Tobias grew stronger. The fever left his eyes. He helped mend the fence line behind her cabin, built shelves for her medicines, and even repaired the leaky roof before the next storm rolled through. Sometimes, while she stitched bandages or crushed herbs, she'd glance up and find him watching her. Not the way most men watched. There was no hunger in it, just quiet wonder. Like he couldn't quite believe he was still alive to notice small things again. One evening, while the fire cracked and shadows stretched across the floor, May caught him whittling. "What's that?" she asked. He held up the small figure. "A horse, its form still rough." "Something to keep my hands busy," he said. "Used to carve to pass the time on a scout watch." "It's good," she said. "You've got steady hands." "Steadier than my mind used to be," he murmured. May smiled faintly, then said, "You've changed since that day I found you." He met her gaze. "You're the one who changed me. Or maybe you just reminded me I wasn't dead yet." But peace in Dry Creek never lasted long. Late one afternoon, Tobias returned from chopping wood with a grim look on his face. "Riders," he said quietly, glancing toward the ridge. "4 of them. Heading west past the creek bed." May set down her work. "Travelers?" He shook his head. "No, I know those men." She straightened. "From where?" His voice hardened. "From Fort Mason. The same ones who left me to die." The air seemed to drain out of the room. "You're sure?" she asked. Tobias nodded, every muscle in his jaw taut. "They ran the ambush. When I refused the captain's orders, they dragged me down and took my sidearm. Guess they thought I'd bleed out. Now they're here." May's heart thudded. "If they find out you're alive," "They won't," he said quickly. "I'll leave by dawn. If I go, they've got no reason to stop here." May stared at him. "You think running's going to heal you? That's what you've been doing since the day they left you in that dust." "It's survival. It's surrender," she shot back. He met her eyes, pain flashing there. "You don't understand. I carry their crimes. If they see me breathing, they'll finish what they started and they'll burn this place to the ground to do it." For a long moment, only the fire crackled between them. Then May said quietly, "You taught yourself to walk again, Tobias. Don't crawl now." That night, Tobias sat by the window long after she'd gone to bed. The moonlight silvered his face, catching the scar along his cheek. He turned the little carved horse in his hand, the one he'd made for her, and felt the old fear gnawing at his gut. He had walked through bullets, fever, and ghosts, but what May said had cut deepest of all. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of living and losing everything again. When dawn bled over the ridge, he packed what little he had, his carving knife, a few bandages, and a note he left on the table. You gave me back my breath. Don't waste yours on me. Then, with his wooden leg creaking beneath him, Tobias Reed limped toward the horizon, away from the only person who had looked at him and seen something worth saving. May found the note hours later. Her hands trembled as she folded it. Outside, the dust rose on the wind like an omen. He was gone, and trouble she knew was coming right behind him. May Garner barely slept that night. The cabin felt hollow without the sound of Tobias's steady breathing or the soft scrape of his carving knife against wood. The fire burned low, casting long, lonely shadows across the walls. She kept rereading the note he'd left on her table, those 6 short words. You gave me back my breath. Don't waste yours on me. She folded it again and pressed it to her chest. Fool man, she whispered, voice trembling. You think healing's done alone? But Tobias was already miles away, a limping silhouette swallowed by dawn and regret. By midday, the town had changed. The air hung thick with tension. Horses restless, shutters drawn tight, whispers curling through the saloon like smoke. From her porch, May spotted 4 strangers riding in from the west, faces hidden beneath the wide brims of dust-stained hats, rifles strapped to their saddles. They moved with a predator's patience. The leader dismounted in front of the general store and asked after a crippled soldier. May's stomach turned cold. She recognized one of them from Tobias's fevered ramblings, the scarred man he called Pike, the one who'd dragged him down during the ambush at Fort Mason. Her pulse hammered. They're here for him. But Tobias wasn't in Dry Creek anymore. And yet somehow she knew. Men like that didn't come just to chase. They came to erase. By nightfall, the town was a powder keg. Marshal Alden tried to keep order, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. When May went to fetch water, she saw Pike and his men ride toward her end of town, lanterns swinging from their saddles. She barely had time to bolt her door before a voice drawled outside. Miss Garner, we're looking for a man who came through here, missing part of a leg. Might have called himself Reed. May's heart slammed against her ribs. She forced calm into her voice. Ain't seen him. Only folks been in this cabin are the ones I've saved. Pike chuckled. That so? Well, you look like a savin' type. Maybe you saved the wrong man. Boots scuffed the porch. A second voice said, Door's barred, Pike. Then open it. Before she could move, the door splintered inward. Rough hands grabbed her arms. She fought, kicking, clawing, but there were too many of them. Where is he? Pike snarled. I told you, gone. He struck her across the face, hard enough to send stars across her vision. Don't lie to me, nurse. The deserter's breathing somewhere, and you know where. When she didn't answer, Pike nodded to his men. Tie her. We'll wait. He'll come back for her. And deep down, even through fear and pain, May knew he was right. Amota, meanwhile, miles out in the desert, Tobias Reed was trying to outrun his ghosts, and losing. Each step drove splinters from his wooden leg into his skin. The horizon shimmered, mocking him with its emptiness. He'd thought leaving would keep May safe, that he could shoulder the danger alone. But as the wind shifted, he caught the faint echo of distant gunfire. One shot, then another. He froze. His body knew before his mind did. Dry Creek. He turned back toward the town without hesitation. Pain flared through his stump with every stride, but he kept going. The desert had taken one leg. It wouldn't take the only person who'd ever believed he could stand again. And when Tobias reached the ridge above Dry Creek, the night below was chaos. Fires burning near the livery, gunshots cracking in the distance. He spotted Pike's men outside May's cabin, lantern light glinting off their rifles. And there, through the open door, he saw her, bound to a chair, blood at her lip, eyes defiant even in fear. He gripped his knife tighter. "Not again," he whispered. The ghosts of Fort Mason rose around him, men screaming, flames devouring wagons, the captain's voice shouting orders to kill. For years, those memories had chained him to guilt. But this time, he didn't freeze. He moved, limping through dust and moonlight. Tobias Reed descended into the town he tried to leave behind, each step a declaration. He wasn't running anymore. Back inside the cabin, May heard the creak of the door and Pike's mocking tone. "Told you he'd come. Mercy makes fools predictable." Then came a crash, the table splintering, a shout, the thud of bodies colliding. Gunfire split the air, deafening in the small room. Pike's men cursed and stumbled backward as Tobias burst through the smoke, eyes burning with a fury May had never seen. He fought like a man unchained, awkward, wounded, but unrelenting. One man fell, then another. But Pike was faster. He lunged, blade flashing toward Tobias's chest, and everything exploded into chaos. The knife hit flesh. Tobias gasped, staggered backward, and the world tilted sideways. He didn't feel pain right away. Just the shock of it, the warmth spreading under his ribs like fire. Pike's sneer glinted through the haze. "Should have stayed dead, Reed," he spat. Tobias's wooden leg buckled, sending him crashing into the table. He caught himself on the edge, blood dripping down his arm. May cried out, struggling against her ropes. "Behind you!" she screamed. Pike turned, too slow. Tobias lunged, driving his shoulder into the outlaw's gut with every ounce of strength left in him. The knife clattered to the floor. The two men fell hard, dust and blood rising together in the lamplight. Outside, shouts echoed, townsfolk awakened by the fight. Tobias rolled, grabbed the blade and pressed it to Pike's throat. His voice came low and trembling, half fury, half grief. "You left me in the dirt. You killed those settlers, blamed the tribes, blamed me." Pike spat blood. "Orders are orders. You broke ranks." "You broke souls," Tobias hissed. Before he could finish it, another gunshot shattered the window. Tobias flinched, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Pike used the distraction to shove him off. May, still bound, threw herself sideways, knocking a lantern from the shelf. It burst, fire licking up the wall. Smoke filled the room as the last of Pike's men burst through the door, then stopped dead when they saw the blaze. "The town's coming," one shouted. "Forget her," Pike barked. "We'll deal with him outside." The outlaws bolted, leaving Tobias slumped against the table, blood soaking through his shirt. May fought her ropes until her wrists bled. "Tobias, stay with me." He turned his head weakly, eyes glassy. "Told you not to waste your breath." "Then don't make me repeat myself," she snapped. "You're not dying, not now." She managed to free one hand, grabbed a knife from the floor and cut herself loose. Then she was at his side, pulling his arm around her shoulders. Together they stumbled out into the cold night, flames roaring behind them. Outside, the street glowed orange with firelight. The townsfolk had gathered, half-armed, half terrified. Marshal Alden pushed through the crowd. "What in blazes?" He stopped short at the sight of Tobias, barely standing, blood trailing from his side. Pike's men were mounting up to flee, their horses stamping in panic. Tobias let go of May and stepped forward, knife still in hand. "This ends here," he rasped. Pike laughed from the saddle. "You can't even stand, Reed. Go on, crawl back to your mercy, woman." Tobias raised his chin, one arm pressed to his wound. "I stood once for the truth. I'll stand again." He limped forward, slow but steady, the crowd parting around him. Every step was agony, but behind him, May's voice anchored him. "You don't need saving," she called out. "You just needed reminding." The words hit like a thunderclap. Pike raised his gun, but Tobias was faster this time. He threw the knife. It struck true, burying deep in the outlaw's shoulder. Pike fell from his horse with a howl, gun tumbling into the dust. The marshal and 2 men rushed forward, disarming the rest of the gang. The fight was over as fast as it had begun. Smoke drifted from May's burning cabin, the glow painting Tobias's face in gold and red. He swayed on his feet. May ran to him, catching him as he fell to his knees. "Tobias, stay with me, you hear?" He managed a faint, broken smile. "Guess I found something worth living for after all." Her hands pressed against his wound, but her voice stayed firm. "You keep pressure on it, soldier. I'm not done patching you up." Hours later, in the church that had been turned into a makeshift infirmary, May worked by lantern light, sewing him closed again. The marshal stood nearby, silent, guilt carved deep into his face. When she finally tied the last stitch, Alden cleared his throat. "He saved half this town tonight. And the truth's out now. Those men confessed the massacre at Mason wasn't on him. He refused their captain's orders." May looked up, eyes fierce. "Then clear his name. Let him live in peace," the marshal nodded slowly. "He's earned that." When he left, May turned back to Tobias, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His breathing was shallow but steady. "You didn't need saving," she whispered, her voice trembling now that the danger had passed. "You just needed someone to see you." His eyes fluttered open, faint but alive. "Then don't stop seeing me." May smiled through her tears. "I won't." Outside, the first pale light of dawn touched the charred remains of her cabin. Inside, for the first time in years, Tobias Reed slept without nightmares. And May Garner, tired, soot-streaked, and shaken to her bones, realized healing wasn't something you gave another soul. It was something you found by refusing to let them give up. And the days that followed carried a strange quiet. Dry Creek, once so quick to whisper and judge, moved more slowly now. Folks who had turned their backs on May Garner began leaving bread at her porch, jars of honey, little tokens of apology no one dared speak aloud. The fire had taken her cabin, but the town helped her raise a new one. And though Tobias Reed still lay weak from his wounds, he insisted on helping. "You'll tear your stitches," May warned for the 100th time. He grinned faintly. "Then you'll just have to sew me again. You're good at that." "Don't tempt me to use a dull needle," she said, hiding a smile. He chuckled softly, tightening the brace around his wooden leg. The new limb he'd carved was smoother, fitted with metal hinges donated by the blacksmith. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. Each morning, May found him outside before dawn, testing his balance against the fence, jaw set in fierce determination. He fell, cursed, stood, and tried again. The sound of his practice thump, step, thump became part of the land's rhythm, like the wind and the rustle of the cottonwoods. By the second week, Tobias could walk from the porch to the well unaided. By the third, he managed to carry firewood. "Stubborn fool," May muttered one morning as he hauled a full bucket of water despite his limp. He looked over his shoulder, smiling that quiet, weary smile. "You gave me your stubbornness. I'm just returning the favor." May's heart twisted. There was strength in him now, but something softer too. Something that came not from anger or guilt, but from peace hard-earned. One evening, as the sunset bled into gold and crimson, Tobias sat beside her on the porch, polishing a small sign he'd carved. The letters were simple but steady. Dry Creek Wagon Clinic and Rest Stop Medicine and Repair. Travelers welcome. May blinked back tears. "You made this?" he nodded. "We've both been patching broken things. Figured it's time to do it properly." She traced the letters with her fingertips. "You sure you want to stay here after everything?" He turned toward her, eyes soft. "I don't run anymore. Besides, this town's got the one person who didn't let me die. That's enough reason to plant roots." She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Instead, she reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Their new cabin took shape beside the old foundation, half clinic, half stable. May filled shelves with herbs, salves, and bandages. Tobias built tables, mended travelers' wagons, and carved splints from scrap lumber. Together they drew in the broken riders with bullet wounds, settlers with fevers, even drifters with nowhere else to go. And slowly, the name May Garner's place turned into May and Tobias's. It wasn't just healing they offered. It was refuge. One afternoon, a small group of soldiers rode through on their way north. The lead officer dismounted and saluted Tobias. "Sir," he said formally, "the governor's office sent word. Your record's been cleared. You're free to ride under your name again." Tobias's throat tightened. "Took them long enough," the soldier smiled faintly. "Men talk of what you did here. Word travels fast when a ghost saves a town." After they left, May found Tobias sitting by the fence holding the folded paper of his pardon. "You're a free man," she said. He looked up, smiling softly. "Always was. Just didn't know it till now." Weeks passed. The plains began to green again, soft rains washing away the ash of what had burned. Tobias's strength returned with the lands. One evening, as they closed the clinic's shutters, May noticed the horse figurine Tobias had once carved sitting on the windowsill. She picked it up, turning it in her hands. "You kept this," she said. "Couldn't throw away the thing that kept me steady," he replied. She smiled, eyes glistening. "You mean me or the horse?" He smirked. "Both." The sound of her laughter mingled with the wind, low and warm. As dusk settled over Dry Creek, the two of them stood outside their cabin, watching travelers pass along the dusty road. For once there was no fear, no running, only the quiet certainty of two souls who had faced the storm and found their way through it together. Later that night, under the steady hum of crickets and stars, Tobias rested his wooden leg by the bed. May sat beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his brow. "You really built yourself a new life, didn't you?" He smiled faintly. "No," he murmured. "We built it." And for the first time she believed it, not as a healer saving a man, but as two broken people who had taught each other how to live again. Outside, a lantern burned on the porch, its flame steady against the wind. Spring came early that year, riding soft winds through the valley. The hills around Dry Creek bloomed wild with color, yarrow, Indian paintbrush, and the shy blush of prairie roses. It was the kind of beauty you had to earn to notice. Tobias Reed leaned against the new fence, watching a pair of travelers lead their tired horses toward the small stable clinic that now bore his and May's names. The wooden sign he'd carved months before hung from a chain above the door. Dry Creek Rest and Remedy, Tobias Reed and May Garner, proprietors. He smiled faintly. The place was simple, a patchwork of lumber and dreams, but it stood solid like the two of them. From the open door came May's voice, low and steady, giving directions to a young mother with a feverish child. Tobias caught snippets. "Boil the water, keep her warm, don't lose heart." The same tone she'd once used on him. When the family left with fresh bandages and thanks in their eyes, May wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the sunlight. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes bright, and a few strands of hair loose from her braid. "You've been standing there long enough to take root," she said with a teasing smile. "Roots sound fine to me," Tobias replied. "I've spent enough years drifting." She walked to the fence beside him, folding her arms over the post. Together they watched the road stretch out toward the horizon, a thin ribbon of dust and promise. "Marshall's due today," May said after a while. "Said he had something for you." Tobias nodded but said nothing. He didn't need more words or medals, he had his piece. Still, when the marshal rode in just after noon, dismounting with a stiff smile, Tobias felt a quiet weight lift. "Read," the man said, holding out a paper with an official seal. "Word from Fort Banner. Your record's clean, full pardon, and an apology besides." Tobias took the paper, feeling its weight more than its worth. "An apology?" he asked, almost smiling. As close as the army comes to one, the marshal said. You're welcome in these parts now. Folks have seen what you're made of. May stood beside Tobias, pride softening her features. He never stopped being that man, she said quietly. The marshal tipped his hat. Town owes you both more than we can say. There's talk of putting your names on the township sign. When the lawman rode away, Tobias turned the parchment over in his hands, then handed it to May. You keep it, he said. You're the reason it means anything. She smiled, tucking it gently into her apron pocket. Then we'll frame it and hang it by the door. Proof that stubborn hearts can rewrite their stories. In that evening, the sky burned gold as the sun fell behind the ridge. A few locals gathered outside the clinic with pies, lanterns, and laughter. Simple gestures, but genuine. Children chased each other around the yard. An old rancher offered Tobias his hand and a gruff, "About time you stuck around." No speeches, no ceremony, just quiet fellowship. The kind Dry Creek had been missing for years. May and Tobias stood a little apart, leaning against the porch rail. You ever think we'd end up here? May asked softly. Not once, Tobias said, his gaze sweeping across the faces lit by lamplight. But I reckon this is what living feels like. She looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the scars, the shadows, the new light behind his eyes. You really have changed, he smiled gently. So have you. Guess healing's a two-way thing. She laughed under her breath, and for a moment, the sound was the only thing that mattered. Later that night, when the lanterns were dim and the guests gone, Tobias sat by the window carving a new piece of wood. His hands moved steadily, confident. May approached quietly. Another horse? He shook his head. Not this time. She leaned closer and saw it taking shape. A pair of clasped hands carved from the same oak he'd used for his leg brace. For us, he said simply. Because you didn't let go. May's throat tightened. She touched the carving, tracing the curve of the fingers. Then we'll keep it by the window, she whispered, so it catches the light each morning. Outside, dawn began to rise, a thin silver line stretching over the plains. Tobias reached for his cane, stood, and joined her at the door. They stepped out together into the cool air, the world still hushed and new. The wind carried the scent of dust and sagebrush, the first birds calling across the valley. Riders passed in the distance, tipping their hats toward the little clinic as they went. Tobias slipped his arm around May's shoulders. She didn't pull away. They stood there, two souls once broken, now rebuilt, not by miracles, but by the stubborn courage to keep living. And as the sun climbed higher, painting the land in gold, May whispered the words that had begun it all. No man quits while I'm still breathing. Tobias smiled. Then I reckon I never will. Two hearts that found life again in the dust. If you felt this story in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West, where love and courage are forged in dust and fire.